Chapter 37. Stowaways. John Hamman, 25. 1920, Masai Mara, British East Africa. Things had been going so well. It was just random luck they were nearby. Looking back, he should have suspected the monster was not alone, but huddled together in the night with his men, all he had been able to think about was getting them home and saving the life of the man who had been mauled. A group of buff had been damaging the fields around one of the villages. The buffalo came in the night and would disappear back into the forest before dawn. The villagers were afraid to try to pursue them into the brush. Most hunters did not like doing this kind of work. Most of their clients wanted trophy-sized bulls with record sets of horns. Work like this was seen by them mainly as a chore. John had no such clients and found that it paid dividends to protect the locals and their crops. Even a small herd of buffalo or elephants could destroy a village's crops in a single night, leading to hunger for the entire village. It had been a little sketchy, and there had been one charge at very close range where the body of the buffalo had knocked John tumbling across the ground before it fell dead from his shot. The big bull snuck up the trail behind the hunters, and only Manny's yell had alerted John as he turned to see the buff, head down in full charge. He'd emptied both barrels into the bull, but even shot dead, its momentum had carried it into John, sending him flying. He was ready to call it a day after that. Over the last week, they had gotten 4 of the herd of buffalo, and John thought their job was about done. The hunters had gotten back to the village, and John's ribs were feeling rather sore. He was ready for a drink and a good meal, but a man came running into the village. The villager was yelling, and an intense back and forth ensued between him and Manny. Manny turned to John and said,
"Wana, this man say his wife taken by ghost lion."
John grabbed his gun and reloaded the chambers.
"Where?"
It would seem their day was not over. They followed the man toward the river. It happened on the trail near the water. He heard his wife scream. When he ran up, all he could see was thrashing in the high grass off the trail, and then a crashing as she was dragged away through the brush. He tried to follow her screams, but they had ended, and all he found was a pile of viscera and a blood trail leading deeper into the woods. It was a bit of a mystery. For some time, people had been finding strange kills. It was all different kinds of animals, all the way up to an elephant. That had surprised everyone. It was not normal for such a large cow, still in its prime, to be brought down. The strangest part was the manner of the kills. They had been eviscerated and disemboweled. Then the lions, which was what everyone assumed them to be, had simply followed the animal until it died. The odd thing was that lions were pretty well hunted out in the area. Some people thought it was a rhino because of the manner of the kills. Unfortunately, none of the kills found so far were fresh. All the animals had been heavily fed upon. By the time the different scavengers had gotten through with them, all tracks and other evidence of the original criminal were long gone. They had the husband and the other men from the village wait where she had been taken from the trail. The hunters followed the drag marks through the grass and soon began to pick up blood. The spot where she met her fate was marked by a scattered pile of her insides. They were partially chewed and then torn free. The body had been dragged farther into the trees. The Maasai was hunkered down by the body. They didn't see any sign of the lion, and they turned to the Maasai. He was staring intently at the ground and pointed with the shaft of his spear. It was a 3-toed footprint, like a bird, but about 10 inches long. This was a problem. John thought back to that dark night, the attack, and what might have been lurking around them outside the firelight when they returned to this time. They may have made a bit of a mess, and now this woman was dead because of their carelessness. The tracker and Manny walked carefully around the area. When they returned, Manny announced,
Maybe 5, Bwana. Maybe 10.
so they hunted as a pack. If they were pack hunters, he wasn't sure they could deal with this. Suddenly, John felt a lot less invincible holding his double. Manny had his carabiner. With some coaching, he had proven to be a decent shot. The Maasai stood there with his spear and shield, unfazed, but John's eyes went to the brush all around them. Suddenly, his hearing seemed to be very acute. Every sound seemed to bode danger, and this body felt more and more like a trap. That may have all been in his mind, but he got the feeling they were dealing with more than dumb brutes. Saying nothing, John motioned for them to follow him back to the trail. He led, and the Maasai, with his spear, brought up the rear. John noticed the tracker's attention was directed to the rear as he waked backward following the group. They did not try to carry the body. That bothered John. It seemed wrong to leave her there to be devoured, but he was more worried about the living at that moment. It was anticlimactic, but John could not shake the feeling they were being watched. They gathered the other villagers. Manny told them a pride of lions had killed the woman, and they must return to the village and stay within its walls until the rogue lions could be killed. The day was growing late. They made sure everyone was in their huts and would remain there with the doors blockaded throughout the night. John half expected some kind of attack, but the night passed quietly. The next morning, the Maasai could find no sign of the creatures. They cautioned the villagers to stay inside at night and not to leave the village unnecessarily. If they had to go for water, they needed to go as an armed group. The hunting group left shortly after dawn, riding for Nairobi. John did not have a lorry yet. Quite a few cars were in the country, but none were for sale. He had been able to afford horses and a string of mules. Manny and John rode the horses, but the Maasai refused to even try. He stared disdainfully, so his mount became a pack animal. It really didn't matter. It turned out that he could run at a faster pace than the horses could maintain throughout the day. In truth, they tended to move at a walking pace with the porters leading the mules. Today, they were in a bit more of a hurry. Manny and John left the Maasai to look after the village. The porters and the mules remained behind as well. They rode 2 of the horses and brought a third along as a spare mount so John could change out midday. The horses were winded as they arrived in Nairobi near dark. John went right to the store and caught the owner before he closed up shop for the night. He needed more firepower. The owner had recently gotten in a bunch of war surplus that arrived officially or unofficially from Europe. It seemed that everyone, from the man on the street to entire countries, were broke and looking to sell anything they could. The table was covered with rifles. Mausers and all other forms of arms were stacked up like cordwood. They could be had for a pittance. Most of them were in quite a state. The war in the trenches had not been kind. If you wanted a 7mm Mauser or an Enfield or any of a number of other more exotic arms, he had quite a hodgepodge to choose from. Everyone had picked up something, but the taste here ran to bigger bores and more stopping power than the military rifles offered. John never thought he would find an 8mm to be too small a gun. He searched through the pile for anything he would trust his life to. For that matter, anything he could find ammo for. The pile, it was a pile, covered several large tables. If these were the better ones the store owner had on display, John didn't want to think about what he might have stacked in the back. He spotted something under one end of the pile on the last table. Its bore made it obvious, as a shotgun. It was a pump. John had to get some help to unearth it from under the rest. He in fact found 2. Looking through the rest of the pile from both sides, trying to spot the shorter weapons, John was able to dig up 3 more. He had 5 of the things. As an American, He recognized them immediately as 1897 Winchester shotguns. The English had no interest in them at all, which showed that their taste was in fact not as well refined as they believed. Who could not appreciate the gifts given to the world by one of the greatest designers of all time, John Moses Browning? The problem was that the English idea of a shotgun was an elegant and very expensive double barrel with a good choke to shoot grouse in Scotland on a family estate. These were short riot guns with a cylinder bore. The American forces under Pershing brought American shotguns with them. They even had a bayonet mount and a heat shield to allow you to grab the barrel when fighting with it. A lot of guards carried them, and they had found their way into the line. It was strictly a short-range weapon, but once you actually got to the trenches, it was fearsome. The shop owner had cases of double Ortbuck for them in the new 2 3/4-inch shells. That was 9 round balls of pain with every pull of the trigger for his feathered friends. He was able to find enough ammunition to supply all 5 guns. It was getting quite late, and the shop owner was obviously losing patience with his customer. Looking at the gun in his hands, John turned toward the pile of completely random war material.
Do you have any of the bayonets?
He had never seen a man's face turn so red. John also purchased some cleaning supplies, oil, steel wool, and even sandpaper. He retired to a room at the hotel and spent most of the night stripping and cleaning the guns, trying to get them working. All of them were rusted. The war was not kind. None of them were pretty, but in the end, John had all 5 working and feeding the shells smoothly. He wished he could have changed out a couple of the magazine springs, but they were as ready as he could make them. John thought about trying to recruit other hunters to this little mission, but Blix was away, and frankly, he didn't trust anyone else. He hadn't even told Blix about the device. That was the way he wanted to keep it. John would have to clean up his own mess. Dawn came early, and the hunters were already on their way back toward the village. They were loaded down with weapons and more shotgun shells than they had ever carried. Looking through the piles of surplus, John had found a round leather case that opened to reveal a telescopic sight. It was a 3X Voigtlander, made in Braunschweig. He had never owned a rifle with a telescopic sight. It used a claw mount, hooking in the front, and with a lever to lock it in at the rear. He had proceeded to search through the entire stack of Mausers, looking for one with sight bases that would fit it. He found 3 fitted with bases. One was the wrong mount. Of the other 2, he picked the one with the better bore. The serial numbers did not match, of course, but at least it could be mounted. At least it was cheap. John thought the shop owner might have given it to him just to get him out of the shop so the owner could go to bed. It looked a sight, so worn and rusted that someone needed to put it out of its misery. John had to beat the bolt open to break it loose. He wished he had gotten some sleep last night. It seemed that as soon as he got into bed, Manny was gently shaking him awake. He half-dozed in the saddle on the way back. It was almost dark when they arrived back at the village. John had improvised a sling with a piece of rope so he could carry one of the Winchesters across his lap as he rode. He was feeling rather jumpy. None of this sat well with him. There had been trouble while they were gone. No one was hurt, but one of the outer corrals was attacked in the night, not long after sunset. The villagers heard quite a commotion. No one could see what had happened, but something got into the pen, and the cattle had gone insane, breaking down the fence and running blindly out onto the plain. That may have been what the predators wanted. Now they had an abundance of slow, stupid animals to hunt at their leisure. Maybe John was ascribing too much to them, but for some reason he feared these animals. Their tracks were everywhere in the corral. The hunters brushed the tracks out. They had to end this soon. John picked the 3 men who he judged most sound from the porters. He took them a little way from the village to a clearing and began teaching them to shoot with the Winchesters. He had varying degrees of success. It was not the custom to do this. John felt they all needed to be able to defend themselves and the camp, but mostly the training focused on not shooting John. They had to start somewhere. While many continued with their training, John worked on the Gewehr 98. The action was still horribly pitted, and even cleaned and greased felt like it had sand in it. He hoped it was safe to shoot. He had to use up half the adjustment in the scope base, but he was able to center the scope with the rifle as he sighted down its bore. He took one of the empty cases from the 12-gauge ammunition and set it up at 100 yards. Setting the rifle across his pack, John settled in, and as carefully as he could, sighted on the mark he had made in the middle of the crate. His eye was quite close to the scope, and when he fired the first shot, it whacked him in the brow. Ow! Actually, he said a bit more than that. He would have to be more careful. He tried again, pulling the stock solidly into his shoulder, and managed not to whack himself in the face. What was more interesting was that he found the second hole in the wood not an inch and a half from the first. Interesting. John fired 3 more times, and his group was only about 2.5 inches. He looked at his new rifle with newfound respect. This poor ugly thing had no right to shoot so well. He paced off the ranges to 400 yards. The range knob was close. He would have to remember some small changes in hold. It actually shot a little high at the longer ranges. This had taken most of the day. They retired back to the village before it became dark. They took turns keeping watch by the window, mostly listening for sounds. The moon did not rise until late in the night. They accomplished nothing from this exercise except to reduce their sleep. No visitors came prowling in the night. They were up early and started the search as soon as it was light. Problems quickly arose. Too many tracks, too many trails disappeared into the brush. The cattle had run into the night in all directions, in a blind panic. The small group followed their tracker through the brush. It was a mess. They kept losing trails and having to double back. Mid-morning, they saw the birds. That was how they found the body of the cow. It had been disemboweled like the other kills and was mostly devoured. The predators had come together to feed on it. From there, the trails all moved off in one direction. They did not walk behind each other in one line, leaving a single trail but parallel, almost like they were in a skirmish line. Did these things ever stop hunting? It also implied that they communicated with each other. It was midday at this point. John wasn't sure how far behind the hunters were. The dinosaurs had eaten. If they were like lions, they would look for water and then find a place to sleep off the meal. The hunters followed one trail, keeping together, partly for safety, partly because John did not trust the men not to fire blindly through the brush in his direction. He wasn't sure he trusted them not to fire blindly toward him when he was in sight. The Maasai and Mani were the only ones he had any faith in. The hunters were all armed with the shotguns, pockets full of shells. John thought he should get some kind of pouch or bag. He made damn sure all the safeties were on. He also had that old Mauser over his shoulder in case they got a longer shot. The Maasai carried his spear. John couldn't fault him for that. It seemed to serve him well. Thinking on that, John drew the bayonet from the sheath hanging from the left side of his belt. He had to make new frogs to hang them from their belts. The originals were lost in the war, rotted away in the wet of the trenches. John thought his little band looked like right proper soldiers, all kitted out, standing in line with their guns and bayonets hanging from their belts. They were very proud, trying their best to stand at proper attention. He should teach them some drills, just for fun, of course. John motioned with his bayonet, signaling for them to fix theirs as well. It added almost 18 inches to what was a short, handy weapon. It was slightly more awkward, but it looked so much more fearsome. The hunters understood spears. Even if they forgot to turn off their safeties, they would not be helpless. John really didn't want their first reaction to be wildly pulling the trigger and firing guns among the hunting team. He had more faith in them using it as a spear, and if they calmed down enough to find and disengage the safety, then they would hopefully be calm enough to shoot without hitting the rest of them, or more importantly, John himself. The tracker moved in front, focused on the trail. John followed, focused much more on what was around them. Manny brought up the rear. It was in the middle of the afternoon when the trail approached a waterhole. They were still a quarter of a mile out, but they were clearly making for it. John felt they were close. He saw the Maasai in front drop to a knee, lowering his spear and shield as he dropped below the brush. He was not looking at the ground. His gaze was fixed to the right side at about a 45-degree angle. John knelt and motioned the others down. The Maasai was still focused in that one direction, almost like a pointing dog. John motioned back to Manny to stay and pointed to the rear. Manny turned to guard their trail. Carefully, John made his way up beside the tracker. His eyes were still set on a point through the bushes. John could not see it. Slowly, the tracker raised his head until he froze. In a moment, he relaxed slightly, and John did the same, slowly raising his head, trying to make out the target. Something was there. Then John saw it. Something popped up and moved in the wind. It turned to the right and then left. It was a feather. It lowered down again, about 75 yards away. Was that a sentry, guarding their trail? What to do? John was sure they were near, but did not think they could get closer with this one watching. Well, they could at least get this one. John slowly set his shotgun down on the ground and slipped the rifle off his shoulder. Pinching with his fingers to quiet it, he slowly flipped the flag safety to the fire position. It was already chambered. He moved the gun to low ready and waited. When John saw the Maasai relax, he lifted up to stand beside the tracker. John was a bit taller than where the Maasai was crouched. He stood straight, his sights locked on where the beast had risen before. John peered through the scope. It was like looking through a straw. He wished the field of view was a little wider. About 4 seconds later, a head popped up, filling the image in the scope, and its eyes locked with John's. The trigger broke, and the head jerked and dropped back down. John heard squawks from the right, and then the sound of animals crashing through the brush. He slung the rifle back on his shoulder and snatched up the shotgun. With his hand, he made a chopping motion toward the right side of the trail. They must have at least gotten the idea, because the men began to advance into the brush on that side of the trail. John made for the spot he had fired at. He saw the Maasai disappear, flanking farther to the left. The bird-like beast was down. The bullet had struck it in the muzzle on the left side and exploded out the back of its head. It was the same as the creature that had attacked their camp, sort of a cross between a crocodile and a stocky ostrich. One uninvited guest expelled from the party. They moved forward until they found a small clearing of beaten-down grass. Like a dog turned in circles to make itself a nest, it was flattened and looked like they had all slept there together, huddled in a pile. All but the one on watch. He'd seen a prairie dog stand guard on its hind legs, looking for danger as the others foraged for food. If the predators were this smart, it could be a tricky problem. They were not going to catch the others that day. The hunters backtracked the beast to where they had drunk at the water hole. They finally got good tracks. Manny announced confidently that there were 6 more. The beasts had broken into a corral. They had stampeded the cattle out of the corral and away from the village rather than killing one there. They hunted and killed 1 cow and then sought water. They returned along their own trail and made camp alongside it, with 1 member watching the trail. If the hunting party had not seen the sentry, would it have woken the others and ambushed them? They had been lucky to have spotted the guard, and in killing it, disrupted the beast's plans. John did not like these animals.